Hey everybody, this is Ryan Mallard. We're going to talk about the airline stocks today. Should we be buying them? Should we be avoiding them? The stock market, you have the S&P 500. It's a breath away from all-time highs. You have the NASDAQ way beyond the all-time highs that were formed back in February. It's looking more and more like a dot-com bubble rather than a recovery. And then of course you have the Russell playing catch up, but then you have the airline industry that's really just been lagging the overall market recovery. Now while the airlines recovered around the same time period as the indices and most of your stocks, they haven't seen the same kind of a bounce. They bounce a little bit, and at times they look like they were really ready to take off. But for the most part, the airlines and related stocks have really lagged this overall market bounce. And now we're at a point in the market where you're sitting at some incredible valuations on like Apple, the FANG stocks, Tesla. And so people are looking, where do we put our money at? And so they're starting to look at some of these stocks that haven't really recovered and ask themselves, is this an opportunity that I should be getting into? Or should I just continue to be jumping into these stocks that are already trading at their all-time highs? There's not a lot of value left or good deals left in this market. So now the question becomes, are the airline stocks or maybe even the cruise line stocks worth investing in? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about whether or not you should be trading in the airline stocks. We're going to go over the main players and my favorite trade setup going forward. Now let's take a look at the first one, Boeing. Now they're not an airliner. However, they provide the airplanes. So this one's a very important stock, and before the COVID issue ever happened, it had its own set of problems. But nonetheless, it's not bouncing, and it's not bouncing very similar to the way that the airline stocks are not bouncing. So you have this rising trend line off of this March lows. So of late, you had this key support level on Boeing at around 166.80, 167. It broke through that level and you thought, okay, this thing's going to start breaking down again. But then it found support on the rising trend line off of the March lows. Held that, and it has had a mediocre bounce since then. Nothing that I would say to get really excited about. The other thing that it has failed to do is form any kind of higher high in the market. That means it hasn't really broken a previous high at all. Instead, it's creating lower highs. That means every time it makes a new high on a bounce attempt, it's not going as high as the previous high. However, there could be an inverse head and shoulders pattern trying to form here on Boeing. It's not there yet, and it's going to take a little bit of patience. It needs to get back over 190. It hits 190, it may become a buy. Not my favorite play here. The reason why is because there's a ton of headline risk. There's always bad news coming out on Boeing, it seems. But this is not where I want to put my money at just because of the headline risk. I like the development here. I like how there is an inverse head and shoulders pattern. I like how there's some potential if it can break above 190, because if it does that, it would technically be forming not only a higher low, but also a higher high. And that's what we want. We want a reversal in the trend. And you do that by breaking the previous high and establishing your first higher high, which it would do in this situation. Now, what about American Airlines? Well, I don't like American Airlines for the main reason that it sucked before COVID made it suck. It's been sucking since 2018, late 2017. Who wants a piece of that action in a market recovery? There's a reason why it still sucks, is because it's always sucked. Now, with that being said, AAL does have a triangle pattern, but it's not breaking out of it at this particular time. So really, it's just in this massive coil at the lows, and it's not really going anywhere fast. You have a bull flag that was forming up until this week, and now it looks like it wants to test the lows from August. So I'm going to avoid American Airline. Now, the only way that I would probably get excited about AAL is if it could break back above 1785. If it does that, then it would effectively be outside of that triangle pattern, and then you may have a legitimate setup at that point in time. UAL, United Airlines, has a very similar chart pattern to AAL. The only difference is that that downward trend line that I talked about in AAL has actually broken out to the upside on UAL. It still has a series of higher lows, but it's not necessarily doing a good job of making convincing higher highs. Yes, it did one last week, but it quickly gave back all those gains, which says there's a lack of conviction and follow through on the stock. Again, you had a bit of a breakdown in it today, which throws this whole potential rally scenario into question. As a result, I would avoid UAL as well. I just don't see a really solid, breathtaking trade setup there. Now, Delta Airlines, it actually is a little bit better because the bull flag pattern is still intact. It has a nice basing pattern. It's holding the bull flag pattern. If it can break back above 29.20, then there's some room for it to go all the way up to 35 on a resistance level that goes all the way back to March of this year. So keep this one closer to the top of your list when it comes to airline trade setups. Hey, and since you're watching this video, I want to introduce you guys to a new feature that I've rolled out on my YouTube channel. Channel memberships, there's 4 different levels. They all range from getting S&P 500 updates to getting the Tesla updates, plus all the FANG stocks and Microsoft. And there's also another level that gives you access to my personal watch lists, as well as charts that I find interesting throughout the day. So take a look at that. It's down below. You just click the join button and it'll give you all the options for you to consider. Now, Spirit Airlines has been one that's been pumped up a lot by David Portnoy of late. I don't know if he's still in the trade, but he got a lot of people probably into it. I'm not a huge fan because look, it's been going sideways going all the way back to the month of June. It's gone nowhere. Now, if it gets back above 1956, maybe it has some legs there, but I'm not going to hold my breath for it. For now, this chart's dead. It's just going sideways. And if it does pop, there's probably going to be better opportunities in some of the other airline stocks like Delta Airlines that I mentioned. Now, what about Southwest Airlines, LUV? Like UAL, United Airlines, it's broken its downward trend line as well. A lot of sideways price action going back to June. Bull flag pattern, triple bottom. I think it's better than AAL. I think it's better than UAL from a technical standpoint, but I would need for it to break out of this bull flag at 35.70 with the potential to run into resistance at 41.80. So that's about a 12 to 13% opportunity to profit off of the stock. I'd be putting my stop loss below last Monday's lows at 33.53. So that's going to give you a trade setup that offers about a 3-to-1 return for you if it works out right. Now, if we're going to talk about companies that fly through the air, let's talk about one that flies into outer space. SPCE, Virgin Galactic. This one's been on my list for a while because it's testing this rising trend line off of the March lows. I'm surprised that with some of the other stocks that we've seen rally like crazy, I'm surprised we haven't seen SPC rally in the same kind of way where it goes from like 18 up to $60. That hasn't happened yet, hasn't even gotten close to that yet. However, it's testing the rising trend line here. It tried to break out last month, looked like it had legs to it and completely fell apart and has rarely seen an up day since. But it's testing the rising trend line. It tried to break below it today, and then it saw some buying power into the afternoon where it was able to save that rising trend line. And if we can get a bounce above 1970, there's the potential for it to start running back up to where it was at the heights of July. If that happens, another really good risk reward setup because you'd be putting the stop loss below the rising trend line. If that's violated on a closing basis, for me, I would get out of the trade. Now, finally, the trade setup that I like the best isn't actually a stock, it's an ETF. It's JETS, it's US Global Jets. It has just a myriad of different kinds of airline stocks in there. Helps reduce the risk, helps reduce some of the headline risk, and it's kind of like the Delta trade setup. It's got a nice base that's formed, bit of a triple bottom, bull flag pattern. It struggled today. It pulled back more than I would have liked for it to have pulled back. Nonetheless, it's still got the bull flag pattern going. And if it can break back above, let's say 1741, 1742, then you put the stop loss at 1676, which would be the lows from last Monday. You have a good risk reward setup for a push back into the 20s, maybe as high as 21, 22, or the highs from June. Again, I'm not overly thrilled or optimistic about the airlines. I get a lot of questions about them. There's a lot of you guys that are in these stocks already or considering it, so I thought it would probably be a good idea, since it's been a few months since I did my last airline stock update, to go ahead and do another one now to tell you what the risk rewards are. Look, you could have a litany of bad news that comes out on any one of these individual stocks or the entire industry as a whole. There's a lot of risk to it. You have to manage the risk. That's why I'm not going rah-rah about the profit potential, but focusing more on the risk aspect of the trade, because that's where you got to put your focus at. If you like this video, I'd encourage you to like it. Also subscribe to the channel so you can get notified every time I do one of these videos. I do about 2 to 3 a week. There's lots of good content that I'm rolling out. I'm always trying to take a feel for what everybody's wanting to hear about, what are people interested in, and I'm tailoring it to what your needs are. So like, subscribe, thank you, God bless.